Hey, everybody, welcome to a special episode of Practically Political. I'm Carrie Sheffield here with Dave Spencer,
Welcome, folks. It's great to have you here.
and we have a special guest. This is a special episode. It's my dear friend, Carla Sands, Ambassador Carla Sands, I should say. She was the former ambassador to Denmark, and she has a long list of public service in other areas. She also ran for the U.S. Senate from her home state of Pennsylvania. She's been very active in helping Republicans finally wake up on the issue of election month, not just election day. And she's a Renaissance woman. She's a medical doctor, a chiropractor by training, but also a former movie star and actress. So she's done it all. I like to call her the most interesting woman in the world. Carla Sands, thank you so much for joining.
Oh my gosh, Carrie, I don't know how to follow that introduction. Thank you. But it's great to see you, my dear friend. I'm so proud of what you do with your book and your lectures and your mission to bring mental health, wellness, an end to depression and anxiety for especially young adults. And then nice to meet you, Dave.
Great to have you on. Well, since
Thanks.
Carrie's it was great to bring you on. I'll let her ask the first question. As always,
Okay.
there's much to discuss.
Oh, so much. Well, Carla, I just touching more on what I had mentioned before about the elections. I think Republicans have been asleep at the wheel when it comes to early voting. And I think that's was the Achilles heel, among others, in 2020, because there was so much emphasis to just show up on election day. But the rules of the game have changed. And I think it hurt us also in 2022 as well. And I know this is something, if you could talk a little bit about what you saw in Pennsylvania, because I think it has implications not only for other swing states, but also for Republicans all around the country.
Carrie, you're so right. If I could just, I'm happy to talk about that. First of all, in my race in 2022, on election day for the general election, we had Mehmet Oz, the Republican candidate, and we had John Fetterman, the Democrat candidate. On election day, Mehmet Oz had around 250,000 votes or ballots banked. John Fetterman had almost 1 million ballots banked. So about 750,000 behind on election day for the Republican candidate. And when you have 50 days of early voting, to try to make that up in one business day or 12-hour day, it's just not going to happen. You can't come 750 votes behind and win in a day. Things happen. The boss calls, the child's sick, the car doesn't start. So there's like 5-10% of the people that are intending to vote that aren't even going to make it to the polls. And we saw the shenanigans in place like Maricopa County with what happened with paper not fitting, machines not working, poll centers just closing down and people not being able to go elsewhere to vote. We saw in 2024, this year, earlier, there was a primary. There was actually an election for George Santos's seat, and it was a special. And New York has 9 days of early voting. The Democrats all voted early, those 9 days. And on election day, there was a snowstorm. And so the Republicans did not get to turn out, and the Democrat candidate won. There's just example after example across the country of Republicans not embracing early voting. We just had a primary in my home state of Pennsylvania a few weeks ago, and on the ballot were Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, and then Joe Biden. Joe Biden's voters 49% of them voted early, 49%. Republicans, 13% voted early for Donald Trump. And if we don't have a sea change, and I was hoping it would happen for the primary so people could practice and get used to voting early, but they didn't. Glenn Youngkin would not be the governor today in Virginia if he hadn't pushed Republicans to vote early really hard. He put his own treasure into that. He pushed them so hard that 60% of the Republicans voted early. So we have a Republican governor in Virginia against a formidable candidate, Terry McAuliffe. So if I could just say, if Republicans will embrace voting early, either in person, depending on what their county allows, or through a mail-in ballot, we will win. If they don't, we won't, because we are generally, except for places like Florida, at a 4-to-1 disadvantage.
Well, I think that's a very good point, Carla. And again, welcome to the show. I think the person that you might want to talk to is our denier in chief here, because let's go back and look at a couple of things. First of all, it was Donald Trump who's crapped on early voting more than almost anyone, and the biggest example of that is Republicans would have had the Senate majority after 2020 because David Perdue got 49.7% in the so-called jungle primary, right? But because Donald Trump had said, "Oh, early voting's rigged, it's a fraud," fewer people voted in the general than the primary, and then fewer people voted in the runoff than the general. And he also, I don't quite understand a lot of these Republican efforts in states to restrict early voting. I thought the point of our democracy was to have as many people vote as possible. So, it's a little late, but thank you. Welcome aboard is what I say to a lot of MAGA people who are finally starting to embrace early voting. I think it's great. And people, since election day is not a holiday, often it's hard for people to take time off from work, even if the weather's good, even if the kid isn't sick or someone doesn't have to go to the hospital. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's great for democracy. So we'll see we'll see what happens as time goes on. But I'm hoping that states will continue to expand early voting, not constrict it. What say you, Carrie?
Well, I will point out, looking forward, it's easy to be angry about the past, but looking forward, I was happy to see in my inbox from the Trump campaign the launch of a new initiative from President Trump for this specific issue. It's called Swamp the Vote. And so he is emphasizing this. And I think it's really important. And I'm glad to see that people like Carla, they're breaking through to him. So I understand. That being said, I do understand the concerns of, the left. The U.S. Constitution says that voting time and place shall be decided by the state legislatures. And there were lots of changes that happened, I believe, contra to that stipulation. And unfortunately, we kept losing at the judicial bench because of standing. It wasn't for the underlying question at hand in terms of jurisdiction for separation of powers. And so in that respect, it was unfortunate that Republicans were asleep at the wheel, even if they had the Constitution on their side. They, at least in terms of the big picture, they were not experts at the minutia of how to move things and how to move the election, mechanics in your favor. And so I think that's a Pollyanna thing to say. We'll just show up on election day. We'll make up for it. I think that's Pollyanna. So I'm glad, even if I would prefer to only have election day and only have, I would prefer to have you have to request and specifically have a need for an absentee ballot, like you are physically disabled, things like that. Versus some states, most of them are, run by Democrats. The default is to give you an absentee ballot and you have to opt out. I think that's wrong. But at the same time, I'm a Republican, so I can't be angry about what is versus what should be. I have to play the game with what we have now. And I think that it's taken them too long, but I'm glad to see the Republican leadership is finally playing with reality.
And it should be pointed out that the states that have mail-in voting, all mail-in voting, like Colorado and Oregon, have some of, again, voter fraud has never been, it has never been strong enough to affect any election on a presidential level. But there's always a little bit of fraud. But the states with mail-in balloting, like Colorado and Oregon, have the lowest amount of fraud. I think every state, I vote by mail every time. It's great. And that's what more states should encourage people to do. Wouldn't you agree with that, Carla?
Yeah, no, I actually don't. So most countries in the world ban mail-in balloting or mail-in voting because it's so rife with fraud.
But there's no proof of fraud here. It's the safest, most
actually, if you look at the recent
type of voting.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm speaking. The recent testimony by John Eastman, who is a constitutional lawyer and a very esteemed, leader, I would say, in American justice, was talking about how many more votes were received by mail than voters in certain states recently. You can find those comments. They're out there online. But I was just when Carrie was talking about this, I just wanted to say that not only are mail-in ballots rife with fraud, but some of the more extreme Republicans got a hold of President Trump and told him, don't let people vote early. I've been voting by mail for 30 years. It's very convenient. But if they said you have to come to the polls and show ID, I'd be thrilled because I know it is more secure. Pennsylvania, the governor, not the legislature, just passed a motor voter, or didn't pass, but made an edict and has implemented motor voter. And so even if you're illegal, you are invited to register to vote when you get your license. And it says you have to prove your license, prove your social, but they're letting you register for an absentee ballot or mail-in ballot without proving. It says if you have it. So there's a lawsuit right now from America First Legal to stop this so that we do have legal voting in Pennsylvania. But you can look online if your vote has been received. You can track it. It's done in most states very, very well. And if voters will just go to their county board election office, they can check what's the earliest day they can vote in person, what's the earliest day that they can go and vote absentee. In Pennsylvania, mid-September, we're voting, baby. And so I'm encouraging every Republican to vote that first day that they're allowed to. Remember, our 50 days of early voting, sad to say, was passed by the Republican-controlled Assembly in 2019, had nothing to do with the pandemic. And they, at one point during my early run, told me they wanted to give more days. Are they out of their minds?
Well, again, we have to move on, but I think we generally agree on the premise. As far as John Eastman goes, he was right up there with Ginny Thomas in trying to overturn a free and fair election. So esteemed is not the word I would use. And again, for all these talks of voter fraud, there hasn't been any proof that there was enough fraud to change the outcome of any election. But what I wanted to talk to you folks about was, obviously there was a trial last week. There was a verdict. We don't need to get into how we feel about the trial because we'll probably say that. But what I thought was fascinating was the ferocity and the intensity of attacks against Larry Hogan, who is trying to win a Senate seat in a very blue state, which the Republicans need. And he didn't even mention Trump. He didn't say anything but let's respect the verdict. Let's let our justice system do our thing. And he was absolutely excoriated everyone from Chris LaCivita to Laura Trump. And so I guess my question to both of you is, first of all, if I had been in the shoes of the Trump crowd, I would have just said, you know what? It's just typical, whatever, the system's rigged, all this. But the fact that they're so intense about it shows a little bit, I think, maybe that it's sort of a little bit of guilt there. But strategically, do you really think it's a smart idea just to go after anyone who even sticks up just for our justice system and doesn't go after Trump?
Who are you asking, Dave?
I'll ask you since you're our guest.
Okay. I think Larry Hogan will win that seat, but he's always disliked Donald Trump. And so it's nothing new. And he's also
but that wasn't my question, though. I mean, is it good strategy to so relentlessly go after someone just because they say, hey, and by the way, almost 60% of Americans agree with the verdict. But is it good strategy?
They may not have all the information that they need to draw an educated conclusion, but I will just say that politics is ugly.
How about you, Carrie? What do you think in terms of the strategy of the whole thing? Because I think that it could cost Larry Hogan the seat. I think it's an uphill battle, but if anyone can win it, it is he.
Well, no, I agree with Carla. I think he's probably going to win it. I mean, he's got very strong name ID. People in Maryland like him. I think what's interesting is that Mitt Romney, who is a big Trump critic, and also Lisa Murkowski and some other never Trump Republicans, they condemned this verdict also. And I agree with Mitt in this case, that this seems really to be a weaponization of the law, because Hillary Clinton, I mean, the facts were almost identical. It was just the fact that her campaign had to pay a $113,000 fine for the way they changed their payments for the still dossier.
Such a
That's a
false
federal
equivalency.
offense. And the only reason why she doesn't have a felony conviction is because she's from New York and the Democrat Party runs the system there. And the other thing is, like, we literally don't even have to speculate what was going on in their minds of these prosecutors, because they literally have been campaigning on throwing Trump in jail. So, like, if you want criminal intent as far as, like, are we misapplying the law here? If you're running to be a prosecutor, you should never, ever, ever specifically target someone before going to trial. I mean, it's just, I think it's a complete miscarriage of justice. And I think the only thing I would say to Larry Hogan is, like, you could be next. Like, the only reason they're not coming after you is because they like what you say, but they don't like what Trump has to say.
This is the classic thing. Hey, because they're coming after me, they're going to come after you. But I would pose the question that, first of all, this is a Justice Department that's, if it's being weaponized, Hunter Biden is going on trial. Can you imagine if Don Jr. were up for some kind of trial and or being charged, that his dad wouldn't try to intercede? Biden's letting the trial go on. Also, Bob Menendez, Henry Cuellar. So this is a Justice Department that's going after people that are guilty. And what you're having here is
pretty naive to say that.
Hold on, let me finish. And first we go after the integrity of our election system. Now we go after the integrity of our judicial system. You have people like Marco Rubio saying this is like Castro's Cuba. This is like Stalin's trial in the 30s. I mean, that is such a naive thing to say. These were 12 jurors that were chosen by both attorneys, and this is a judge. He's being ridiculed because he gave $15 or whatever it is to Biden. He also viewed against the prosecution a lot of time. He didn't allow the Access Hollywood tape. He didn't allow a lot of other women that accused Trump to testify. So again, the problem is, I think you could make a better argument. This is a serial fraudster who's gotten away with everything for his entire life, finally got caught. Look at all the people around him who have gone to jail for similar crimes. Michael Cohen, you name it. You judge people by the company they keep. Of course, they've all been pardoned now, but again, it's just outrageous to again. It's the systematic attack on the pillars of our democracy, and that has been, I think, the most damaging legacy of the Trump era. But go ahead, Carla.
Yeah, Dave. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. First of all, they're going after Henry Cuellar because he's not marching to the Democrat leftist tune right now. He's actually he's an old style blue dog Democrat who's the only pro-life congressman on the Democrat side in the whole Congress.
Bob Casey's pro-life.
No, he's not. He voted against the Born Alive bill. You are wrong. Okay. And it's not only Henry Cuellar, they're also going after Bob Menendez. He doesn't toe the line on some of the so-called enemies that the Democrats have identified in the foreign countries and leaders. And because he has his own opinions, they definitely targeted him to take him out. And Donald Trump's going after Donald Trump, sending Colangelo from the DOJ up to New York to run this, bringing high-powered attorneys from private practice into this targeting of Donald Trump, reviving something that DOJ declined to prosecute over the years, and actually changing it so that even though it was beyond the date that they could prosecute him, they changed the rule and said, no, now that it's federal, we can do this. They on the left, the leftist Democrats changed the rules to target their enemies, just like the old Soviet Union. If he were a Democrat, he would never have been targeted. And I think, as a matter of fact, we have to bloody the noses of the leftist Democrats so that they stop doing this. I think Hillary Clinton should be on the menu. She broke so many laws when she was the Secretary of State. She sent highly classified information to a private server, which our adversaries certainly were able to harvest. She broke up with bleach bit and hammers all of her computers, the cell phones, to hide information. This woman broke so many rules that if it was you or me, we would be in jail for this for a long time. So, and if you look at what Joe Biden has done, enriching himself and his family from China, Uzbekistan, Russia, Romania, the list goes on and on. What they've done, it's unconscionable, and it's also dangerous for our country when you have a compromised leader, whether it's Hillary bringing in the money for the Clinton Foundation and enriching her family from adversaries, or if it's the Biden family. This is a very serious time.
Well, again, I would always say, look back. This is not the first time. Look at Trump University. He settled. Look at the E. Jean Carroll case. Trump has been already convicted of a lot of things. It's like Jerry Sandusky, one or two times. Okay, but after five, that's enough. And by the way, as far as Joe Biden goes, you can make a lot of criticisms about Joe Biden, and I have many as a Rockefeller Republican who's feels deserted by the party, but he is not a crook. And the best example of that is, do you folks know this is the first impeachment inquiry in the history of our country that hasn't resulted in an impeachment? And do you realize how humiliating that is for the people who bring it up? The reason is because they have no evidence. There is nothing to go on. Because when you have an impeachment inquiry and you don't have an impeachment, you're basically saying, hey, we were wrong. We don't have any charges to bring against you. So that's the only thing I need to know. And in terms of compromising our democracy, here you have a guy who's basically told the oil companies, well, if you give me $1 billion, I'm going to basically do your bidding. I mean, drill. Right. And by the way, we are producing more oil right now in this country than we ever have. So the whole drill, baby, drill thing, of course, Trump is so misinformed that he says,
but we're not growing at the rate we should be growing for energy.
We're producing 13 million barrels of oil, which is a record. So again, everything is either reflection or projection. And this is another classic case. But Carrie, let's let you in here.
Well, on the oil, I would point out that you're right. We've never produced more. However, you now have the Biden FTC, Lena Khan, trying to criminalize and go after U.S. oil producers and say that they were colluding with OPEC. So it's like he wants to have it both ways. Meanwhile, the Biden administration shutting down oil reserves from drilling and banning leases on federal land. So he wants to try to have it both ways. He's trying to both kowtow to the woke left on the environment, but then he's also trying to attack the oil industry. I mean, this is why, for the first time since COVID, economic consumer sentiment is now pre-COVID, as in like we are lower now in our economic confidence than even 2019. So we're nosediving in terms of how confident people are. And this record stock market rally that we saw, it's basically, it's really good data coming out of the Trump former economic White House team, Steve Moore. He's pointed out that, and also Larry Kudlow, the stock market gains have basically all been eaten up by inflation. So that's why people, as much as the only issue Biden has to try to run on right now is abortion. That's literally it. And I'm talking about polling from ABC, PBS. These are not right-wing outlets. They say on inflation, even on education, which is shocking because usually that was a Democrat advantage. They trust Republicans more. They trust them more on foreign policy. The Middle East is on fire because of Biden's recklessness and weakness toward Iran. So on every single issue, the only thing they have is abortion. And so that is why they are ultimately going after Trump, because they have nothing else from a policy standpoint, nothing else. And that's where I would quote Margaret Thatcher. She said, I always delight immensely when someone attacks me personally because it means they have nothing policy left to say.
That's right. And thank God Donald Trump never attacks anyone. But what this election will come down to, sadly, is the only two people that these two old, I think neither of whom should be running candidates, can beat is each other. That's why every generic Democrat polls better against Trump every generic Republican votes or polls better against Biden. So if it's a referendum on Biden, then he will lose, which it has been right now. If it's a referendum on Trump, he will lose. And
Not
my
true.
hope is,
Trump
but
beats
let me
even.
let me finish my point. Then I'm going to give you the last word. I promise, because I know we have time issue. But what I'm hoping is that what this trial will do is that it'll get Trump so enraged, because most people think of Trump as the 2020 Trump. They haven't seen the 2024 Trump, who is more addled and more deranged and off the rails than ever. And it's always about him. So I'm hoping that he's going to go out and just be more off the rails than he's ever been with his trial thing. And so people will see, and they'll be reminded of the fact, hey, this was the Donald Trump. And then they might look back and say, hey, job growth during the last 3 years of the Obama administration was better than the first 3 years of the Trump administration. Donald Trump added more debt during 4 years than all other presidents had in the previous
during the pandemic.
and
Last year was the
Joe
pandemic.
Biden's had more growth than Trump has had. So I think people will be reminded, and maybe they'll stop viewing it through these rose-colored glasses. But I will give our distinguished guest the last word.
Well, thank you, Dave. So to set the record straight, I'm a Reagan Republican, and President Trump was actually the best president in my lifetime. We had the best economy, the best employment, even for people without degrees, even minorities, the best for women in 50 years, wage growth and employment. And we also had peace around the world, no new wars. He defeated ISIS. He was able to have the Abraham Accords begin under his leadership. So many great things happened. So we have a differing of opinions. I hope that President Trump wins this year. I hope that your viewers vote early. Thanks.
All right, folks. God, such a great conversation. Carla, we could go on for hours. And the one thing that's great about this show, unlike other shows, is that everything here is always done with affection and respect and smiles. And if the rest of the world did that, our whole system would be a lot better, because we always go after the argument. We never go after the person. And it's been so great to have you on. We really hope you'll come back. And
Thanks.
On that note, I wish all of you a great June. We will be back later in the month. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for coming, Carla. We'll see you on the next episode of Practically Political. I'm Dave Spencer.
And I'm Carrie Sheffield. Thanks for joining. We'll catch you next time.